Batman is back, and in blue. This is your look at the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse, the blue variant of the Batman the Animated Series Batman. When two shots rang out, Bruce Wayne's life changed forever. He pledged himself to justice, and he has upheld that oath for years. Wearing many names, the Dark Knight, the world's greatest detective, the Caped Crusader, he has battled tragic foes like the Joker, the Penguin, Mr. Freeze, and so much more. But deep inside, he knows that he shares something with them that most humanity wouldn't understand, a commitment to the fight. Before we get a closer look at the DC Multiverse Batman the Animated Series variant Batman, the first thing we're going to do is calculate how tall the figure stands, starting at the bottom, working my way up to the top, and why don't we stop it maybe around the area of his ears, maybe as that being the highest point. After all, that's the tallest point in the figure. Yeah, we'll go with that. According to my trusty tape measure, you're looking at the variant of Batman standing 7.2 inches in height. And switching that to centimeters, then you're looking at the figure standing 18.3 centimeters tall. Now, if anybody isn't in the know, this figure was released before. We'll just reach off camera and bring in the regular black costumed Batman. Just get his feet to stand, because these ones, being that their torsos are a lot bigger, they do have some difficulty standing. It's almost like they need a display stand. Yeah, that'll be one of his accessories that we'll look at in a second. But it's not really much that changes from one to the other. Notably as well, this blue Batman has been around for a while. I finally now got a chance to pick him up as EB Games. It seems the first stop in Canada to get these figures before the rest of Canada gets them. EB finally gave me that little ring-a-ling-a-ling on my phone to tell me that they had finally stocked the variant of Batman. So yes, admittingly, I know I'm a little later having a look at this figure, but you can still see when you look at them side to side, there's not really much that changes at all. They're not reinventing the mold necessarily. They're simply just giving him a different color of paint. Instead of the black with the interior of the cape being purple, Batman on this side, the newest one that we're going to be looking at, is all done in blue. And I have to admit, I'm kind of liking him a little bit more in blue than I liked him in black. What? Liking the variant over the OG Batman? Blasphemy! Well, before you get to your scathing comments down below, just hear me out. One thing before we kind of discuss and address the fact that he has a different costume going for him, let's have a look at the accessories that come included with the figure. It seems like we always start these by looking at the trading card. Now, the trading card is unique in the sense that it's not the same white border that we have gotten before. They give us instead sort of this foil treated card. Unfortunately, I don't have the other one with me at the time to show you the comparison side to side, but I believe this is the exact same card, other than the fact that, like I said, it's been treated to a silver color scheme. I kind of, in a way, wish that this could have been the case across the board, that all the cards included with these figures could have been treated to the same foil look. But, of course, that gets a little expensive, and this does make this one a little bit more unique than the others. The back is still the same, so same as the read-up is also the same on the back of the card as well, but I really do like the foil. That's certainly a nice touch. It also comes included with the display stand. Not too much changes there either. Down below is there the DC printed logo in a different styling of black, a little bit darker of a black than the rest of the matte black for the base. And then there's also a singular peg hole on the top that's going to attach the underside of Batman's feet. Definitely will be using these, especially with these animated style figures, where in the case of Batman here, he's a much broader torso, skinnier legs. He's a lot more difficult to put on just a standing on his own. So use the display stand. That's what it's there for. And then we'll have a look at the rest of the accessories that come included with the figure. These are all still carryovers from the original Batman. He does get himself the Batarang. The Batarang, I may have made the joke when we first looked at this, that it reminds me of those old small western towns where there's a sheriff running things, keeping things in order, and having to deal with the family clan feud outside the reaches of the western town. Kind of looks like his old mustache, doesn't it? I don't know. It's a bit thick. I feel like, and I may have mentioned this even when we looked at this the first time around, that there may have been some miscommunication when it came to the original design of the Batarang to what we ended up actually getting. Or it had to be that McFarlane had to, obey by the code for the sizing of accessories. Maybe he had to make it a little bit thicker, but I would still think swallowing would be an issue. You would still worry that a kid would put this in his mouth or her mouth and swallow it. But there's got to be some reasoning why the Batarang has to be so substantially thick. I'm not going to spend the entire review talking about the Sheriff Mustache Batarang. Instead, what we'll move on over to is his grapple gun. The grapple gun doesn't change at all, again, from the one that we had gotten before. Still has the activation buttons on the tops and the bottom done painted here in red. The grapple hook is not removable. Would have been nice, actually, for the variants if we had been given a different hook on the end, more like that claw instead of this actual hook, but that's what we get. I may actually consider the idea, now that I have two of these, to go in and tweak and customize this a little bit by maybe taking and cutting this hook right off. I know you're thinking, why would you destroy an accessory? Well, it's just for the idea that if I can take this off, and I have just the grapple hook on its own, I'd like to almost be able to display Batman without the extra hook on the end. So you know what? I might just do that. I might just do that. Put that to the side. And last but certainly not least, Batman does have a pair of hands. Some of the hands are a little bit better suited for, like, for example, the Batarang it seems to work a little bit better on this hand. The grip is a little bit wider. This hand doesn't have as much of that, but it does have like a little trigger finger, which seems to work a little bit better when it comes to the grapple hook. The grapple hook still involves you to sort of shimmy it down there. But you can actually have it where it almost looks like Batman's ready to trigger and fire that off. And that's a nice touch. If you do want to change out the hands, for example, it's really quite easy. You're just going to grab the arm. Make sure that the joint doesn't go along for the ride. Pull that off, a nice big bulbous joint. And then find the appropriate hand. We want to make sure thumbsies still go in after all. That's the rule and conduct when it comes to switching out the hands. But at least the hands, I have to say, are easy enough to change on Batman here. So again, let's do a couple of comparisons. We'll just move the newer one that we had picked up, and we'll bring in the original one so you guys can see the difference between the two. Bodies are exactly the same. It seems the coloring of his body, primarily the gray, as well as the bat emblem, seem to also be the exact same color from one to the other. The face coloring also seems the same. So it really then boils down only to his gloves, his bat underoos, his boots, and of course his cowl and cape to be the things that changes from one to the other. Of course, the original one, when we had a look at it, the interior of his cape was all done in this kind of purpley blue. And that's completely now omitted when we have a look at the variant here. I did like this figure initially. I mean, I feel now as McFarlane has sort of got his footing going when it comes to these releases, you can really see that the newer DC Multiverse figures are not leaps and bounds better, but there's definitely improvement that he's made from the ones that we had gotten before. And while there's nothing really necessarily wrong with this one, I find its biggest problem is the fact that it's just really big and bulky. Skinny legs, so of course the way it's designed from the cartoon, and a very broad torso. I don't know if I may have mentioned this actually when we had a look on this guy, but I mean, looking at it, I always thought this body worked better for the new Batman Adventures Batman versus the original animated series. I gotta feel like McFarlane had planned this guy to be a new Batman Adventures Batman, except, of course, the emblem would be completely different. The emblem, actually, I did mention in the other review as well, seems like it's an actual separate piece. Like you can run your finger along it. It's not printed on. It actually feels like they've cut out this area on his torso. But I really do, again, feel like this guy really was intended to be a new Batman Adventures Batman, judging by the shape of his cape, judging by the design of his cowl, and judging by the fact he's got a really broad torso and really skinny legs. The new Batman Adventures seems to have the proportions a little bit more stark like this versus the original Batman the Animated Series. But again, we'll put the two figures side to side just to show you guys the difference between the two. You know, and again, a way, I kind of like the brighter blue done here on the newer Batman. I don't know, it's just when I'm looking at it, I feel like the mold seems to work, at least in my opinion, in the lighter blue than it did on the black. One of the big problems also when it came to this initial figure was that the eyes, unless you're looking at them from straight on, they were really prone to getting lost. Because he had put the eyes so far back, it usually meant a lot of times that if you had shadow hitting over top of it, the eyes really at times did get lost. Especially then, again, when you look at this Batman, the newer one, I feel like the eyes show a little bit better on this head sculpt. As you can see, though, the heads are exactly the same. There's nothing that's changed between the two. The lips are exactly the same, and even like the pale coloring that they used for the face carries over, and nothing has changed there. The emblem is the same. The utility belt is also the same. Again, there's nothing different at all except for the different color scheme. We'll move this one out of the way because we've certainly spent already time in a previous review to discuss the pros and the cons of this Batman. And we'll leave it to you, the viewing audience, to decide again if you like this particular mold. We'll put that Batman just to the side for the time being. We'll just kind of put him down here for the time being. We'll again just look at Batman here. Again, he still has the problem with the eyes being a little bit more recessed back, but maybe it's because he's against the backdrop of a very bright blue cowl that I find the eyes work a little bit better on this Batman than the other one that we had looked at. Unfortunately, the paint isn't the cleanest when it comes to Batman's face. You'll really see it when you look at it really closely, that the blue from the top of the cowl has started to bleed or has bled right into the bottom of his face. He has a little of it on the side, but he has a lot more of it along the top area here. And that's really a bit of a shame, the fact that that has carried over as much as it has. I mean, you really do see it. From a distance, sure, yeah, you're probably not going to be noticing it as much. And maybe it is one of the faults of looking at these figures super close like this, is that you do see there's some imperfections when it comes to the figure's paint. There's also a little bit of a sculpting issue when it comes to the bottom of his chin. It sort of looks like a little tiny badger has started to maul away at Batman's jaw. Other than that, I mean, like, the face is good, but again, I feel like the body worked so much better as a new Batman Adventures than it did for the Batman the Animated Series. Also going completely stark blue, I feel there was also a missed opportunity to not incorporate Batman's design that he has in the cartoon, where, depending on the way that the light's hitting Batman, more blue sometimes is visible against the backdrop of his black. I feel in this case, they could have easily just made a section of his head blue and keeping the rest of the cowl done all in black. Or they could have maybe done that with the original release of Batman. And then maybe this one could have been a new Batman Adventures, just making use of the exact same mold as before. So the head sculpt is certainly passable if you like the designs of the original animated series, A New Batman Adventures. He's got very pointed, squared off shoulders, and this is actually just a softer plastic that they just put over top of it. Now, these ones are also one of my big problems when it came to the animated figures that McFarlane was putting out, was the additional cup socket that they had on the torso. It does add a little bit of excessive width increase when it came to Batman's torso. I was more bothered, I feel, when it came to the Green Lantern, John Stewart, because he didn't have the cape. The cape sort of hid the fact that he had the additional width on his arms. I really think, again, this socket joint doesn't need to be there at all. If they just keep this straight, bring this up, and bring the top area here up, and just kind of omit this altogether, and then they just attached the arm to this piece, I feel like you would have a little bit more of a seamless looking body. Maybe the intended plan was, I don't feel it's so much the fact that they did want to have some additional articulation, because I really don't feel like this cup joint, this little cup socket, serves to give you much additional articulation. I feel like you could get just as much out of it as you could if it wasn't there in the first place. I feel like he's actually put it in there more to conceal the fact that there's a joint. The resulting of that, unfortunately, means that while you do hide this part of the joint, you now notice a more noticeable, I feel, section that's not part of his chest, and it's not part of his arm. It's sort of this dividing cushion between the two. But again, going back to the point that I'd made before, there's something about him being done in this very bright, classic comic blue that I feel works well for this mold. Could they have, again, been added the shadowing in it so you would have had the two-tone effect of the blue and the black? Absolutely. But still, an all blue works well for Batman. The color scheme seems to pop a little bit more when it comes to the backdrop of the gray. Yes, unfortunately, he loses some of it in the cave because it doesn't have that secondary color on the inside. But I think the blue works quite well. I also feel it's a good blue that McFarlane went with when it came to choosing this for this figure. Now, the Detective Comics version of Batman, one of the earlier Batmans we looked at from the new DC Multiverse figure line, also is getting released here in the blue, or has already been released. Haven't seen him pop up yet in Canada. I have seen only images of him certainly surfacing, but I think almost the blue on the animated series treatment of Batman works better than the blue on the Detective Comics version of Batman. But again, I won't really be able to say that 100% certainty unless I literally have like both figures in front of me and I can do a comparison side to side. A nice paint that they've used for the utility belt, going the route of almost a mustard yellow. The paint, unlike the cowl, is generally quite clean. Yes, there's a little bit of bleed onto the trunks, but it's generally not too bad. Then, of course, we get down to his legs. And one of the big problems I have with these figures, and it's more just for the fact that the torsos are so broad on these, because he's generally made up of very skinny, lanky legs, that puts really a lot of pressure and weight on the joints of the ankles to sort of keep the figure upright and prevent it from falling over. A lot of times, if I am simply just taking the figure and putting him down on a stand, he seems to stand okay. Though when I compare it to, say, like the other Batman, we'll just move him over for a second, I have noticeably more looser legs. Well, I don't. Batman has more noticeably looser legs on the original release. So you probably already saw a couple of times when I put this Batman down, I sort of have to put him down and just kind of get him to balance just right. Definitely, though, make use of those display stands, especially when it comes to these particular figures, because the torsos are so big, because the legs are so skinny, and because he only has those ankle joints as swivel joints. It does mean that these figures are a little bit more prone to falling over versus the other multiverse figures that we've looked at in the past. Okay, so let's have a look at the figure's articulation. So the head rotates all the way around. It's one of those cases where, because the neck, and I don't mean to leave Batman in such an awkward predicament, but if the neck, as you can see, sort of angles this way, because the ball joint is also going that same direction. And it means that when it comes time to rotate the head all the way around, you're not necessarily rotating it this way and this way. Instead, when you rotate the head, you sort of have to fight with it, and it doesn't seem to want to rotate on a level. Instead, it seems to want to rotate higher up. The head does hinge up, so that's a nice touch. You can also hinge it down, and there's a little bit of rocking back and forth just because of the way it's pegged into place. One last thing I'll just talk about, and we'll put this to bed, is the head sculpt also, because of the way that the eyes are designed, I feel looks and suits better the new Batman Adventures. Especially like his chin. Like his chin doesn't look like animated series Batman. I don't even know if I had said so much of that when we looked at the original black version of this guy. But I definitely wanted to mention it again in this review, that this body and this head sculpt specifically really caters better to the new Batman Adventures. Okay, we'll stop talking about that. So when it comes to the arms hinge forward and back. You could probably guess it. There's a little bit of restriction just because of the way that the cape drapes over top of his shoulder. He does have that cup joint here on the side, but again, I really don't feel it serves any purpose other than to make a bit more of an eyesore. Luckily, Batman has, working to his credit, the cape draping over top of it. It hides it a little bit more, but you can still see that cup joint. I feel really doesn't need to even be in there in the first place. The arms go forward, so if you want to have him firing off the grapple line, you can do that. The arms hinge back. And Batman does also have a swivel at the top cut, basically where it's attached to the shoulder right there. He does have the joints where when you bend the elbow, there is a very noticeable joint on the underside, like a ratcheted joint. At least to its credit, it's a bit of an eyesore when you see it from the underside. But so far, knock on wood, all the figures that McFarlane have released, even dating far back to the McFarlane's Walking Dead line, all those joints have still stayed relatively tight because it has to continue to move across these little grooves that are on the underside of his elbow. So yes, while unfortunately you do see quite a lot of it when you bend the elbow, it does allow still, at least for very tight joints, at least here on the elbows. The Batman's hands rotate all the way around, and you can hinge them up, you can hinge them down, basically the way that these are sandwiched together. There's a little pin in between and connects those two halves together. Then for his torso, has an upper torso ball joint. He has then a lower torso ball joint. The legs split out. Unfortunately, because he's using ball joints on the underside here, you can see how it's connected into the thigh. It means as a result of it, I've already noticed this Batman has loose legs. Not loose like the other Batman that I'm still trying to get to stabilize and stand, but I've already noticed that this one's a little loose when it comes to just the way that the cup is sitting on that socket. I'm going to see if I can probably even pop that leg off, add a little bit of floor polish or nail polish to beef up that ball joint to hopefully make the legs just a little on the stiffer side. Batman also does have a double hinge on the knee. There's one, there's two. He doesn't have any articulation on the boot. However, he does have articulation on the feet. They rotate all the way around, and because he has that pin hinge joint, the pin is running through the two halves of the joint. That allows the feet to hinge up and down. No ankle pivot, but he does have toe articulation as well. So really, like, this is a case where maybe perhaps completionists would be more compelled to want to pick up this release if they already have the original Batman. Just again, getting him to stand properly. One of the downsides, again, is with these particular releases, with the Batman being slightly broader in the torso, okay, quite considerably broader in the torso, you have a little bit more difficulty, I find, to get the figures to stand. And that's really all the figures that I've looked at from the animated series, whether it be animated series Superman, whether it be animated series Jon Stewart. Because again, the proportions of their bodies being so much bigger up here and so much less down below, yes, there is some difficulty when it comes to getting the figures to stand, but there again goes back to the original talking point. Don't mean to surprise you, but they do also come with display stands. Definitely use those if you have them available. Really, this was a figure that I, for all intensive purposes, was happy and content to pass on. It's very easy to also come to that conclusion, because when you think to yourself, okay, well, only the US stores are going to get it, Canada's probably not going to be able to get this figure, and I'm probably, if anything, going to have to go online to places like eBay, pay a fortune to get it. It's just not worth it when I was sort of lukewarm about the figure in the first place. Then, of course, one day I get a phone call from the clerk at EB Games. They've been all this time putting those figures to the side for me, so that the moment they came in, I would get a call, a ring-a-ling on my phone. Yes, that's actually what my phone sounds like. It's a ring-a-ling-a-ling. I answer the phone. They said, well, we have the blue version of the animated series Batman. We've put it aside for you if you want to come in. I was going to come in really with the plan that I was just going to say I was going to pass on the figure because, again, I really wasn't thrilled with the initial design of it. But seeing it in front of me, maybe it's just for the fact that the colors were much more bright blue and vibrant on this figure, I decided to still pick it up and take it home. Comparing it next to the one that I had gotten before, I have to say, even though the mold is still sort of, not really sure. I do say, though, it works well and better, I feel, with the brighter blue colors. Having it all blue seems to almost at least draw attention away from its mold and a little bit more just to the idea that it's a better looking Batman. I also find that his eyes stand out a little bit better because his head, his cowl, is all blue instead of black. The other one wasn't bad, don't get me wrong, but I kept thinking the whole time while I was looking at the figure, first of all, its legs are really spindly, so he has some difficulty standing, but it was like the eyes that really pulled a lot away from the figure. Because the eyes were so far back and white, and because the head was black, the cowl was black, I just felt like the eyes didn't stand out well enough that I felt like that was where the figure missed its mark. Somehow, even though it's the exact same head sculpt on this Batman, doing it all in blue seems to work better for its eyes. It's unfortunate that he does have a little bit of the bleed of the blue down into the rest of his face, but it's not noticeable enough from a distance. Even though I'm still sort of on the fence as to how I feel about McFarlane's side take on his animated series figures, sort of not impressed with the Jon Stewart, sort of not really super impressed when it came to the animated series Superman, and sort of being on the fence with Batman. Somehow giving him a different color scheme still doesn't change my opinions about all the things I just said, but it somehow masks it a little bit better when he's treated to a brighter blue color scheme. Could, yes, this figure have been a Batman, the New Adventures Batman? Absolutely. I really think right from day one that was the intended plan. I don't know why they didn't do that, because I think the mold works better for that style of character design. And yes, I do feel like they probably saw a missed opportunity, or I see a missed opportunity, where they could have probably added a whole lot of blue with the shadowing done in black, similar to the way it's colored in the cartoon. They didn't do that for either one of these figure releases. Maybe down the road we'll get this figure yet again, and I'll still be on the fence until finally I get this figure in hand. The walkaway, the takeaway from this, is somehow adding the blue to Batman, a figure that was sort of on the fence about in the first place, seems to work a little bit better, I feel, when he's all done in blue versus the black we looked at before. Now, again, that's just my own opinion. Your opinion may differ from mine, and that's the beauty when I get a chance to sit down and talk to other collectors. Your opinion may be different than mine. My opinion may be different from yours, but that's, again, one of the fun aspects of hanging around and talking with people that all share the same love, the love of collecting figures. Let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of the blue version of Batman from the DC Multiverse line. And again, I'm a little behind on getting the review on this one done, simply just because I had to wait for Canada to eventually stock it. I didn't want to go online. I didn't want to go to eBay, and thank goodness I didn't have to. I got that friendly little ring-a-ling from my EB Games store. And yes, that's what my ringtone sounds like. If you guys are new to the channel and liking the content you're seeing, consider the idea of hitting that bell notification down below. Consider the idea of turning on the bell. Consider the idea, first of all, of hitting that subscribe button. Then consider the idea of turning on that friendly bell notification. And keep in mind, Monday to Friday, 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is when you'll find new videos popping up on this channel. Definitely going to be a lot of stuff coming your way, guys. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.